In this edition of the Resilient Professional podcast, we're going to talk about the cultivation of insight and wisdom. We're going to talk about how you can create situational awareness so you do not rationalize away issues and problems in your professional settings. And finally, we're going to talk about the importance of practice and how practice, when done well, helps you to become an anticipatory professional. Welcome to the Resilient Professional Podcast. Professional success really is a game of inches. You have the experience and knowledge, but you realize that professional success is more than just knowledge and experience. It's actually applying what you already know. It's about consistently applying what you know in spite of the challenges that are sure to come your way. You know, Olympians know how to battle adversity and to perform at their best, even in the midst of setbacks and frustrations. I think we can learn a lot from the Olympian mindset. It really is about the cultivation of resiliency. Physical resiliency, emotional resiliency, relational resiliency, cognitive resiliency, resiliency in each aspect of our lives. On a regular basis, we'll unpack these ideas through guest speakers and podcast material that will take you to the next level of professional success. In this edition of the Resilient Professional Podcast, we're going to talk about the examined life. What do we mean by the examined life? Well, it's not hard, it's not complicated, although we can make it complicated. It really is about reflecting on your purpose, it's about reflecting on what you've done in the past, and it's about reflecting on what you'll do next. Now, why is that important? Well, we know that resilient individuals, and certainly resilient professionals, do take the time to reflect on purpose. And they do take the time to reflect on how that purpose is going to roll out in the context of their current lives. They live lives of purpose. You know, Benjamin Franklin reflected, after spending his first trip to England and spending time in London and then coming back, he reflected on his many experiences. But what he realized was it was just a helter-skelter of experiences. There was no pattern. There was no planning around it. And he used the metaphor of, how an author approaches the writing of a book. And often they'll develop an outline. They'll have a journey, a roadmap that they'll use to begin writing that narrative. And he said exactly the same thing should be done in our lives. We should have an outline. We should have a narrative about where we are and what we're doing now and where our life will be headed to set proper context and give us direction for the kinds of things that we should be putting our time into in the context of our purposes and our long-term goals. Now, the other thing is that resilient people adapt well to what's happening around them. They're conscious of those experiences in the current context. They're really good at battling through self-deception. We've talked about that before in this podcast, is that human beings have a great ability to rationalize away issues. And so resilient people are very good at keeping themselves from being self-deceived. They don't have too much optimism, but they don't have too much pessimism. They find a nice balance between those two extremes. And they have the ability to see the world as it actually is. That's a critical skill when we look at our lives, is to be realists, but at the same time, we can be optimists. Now, part of living the examined life is having a process, having a way that we can look at every situation and get a clear understanding of our what we call situational awareness. In his book, Resilience by Eric Greitens, he actually talks about an experience he had with one of his teachers who came up with 4 key questions that would give us situational awareness in any kind of context we find ourselves in. So these are the 4 questions, and then we'll unpack these questions in a little bit of detail. So whenever you're in a particular situation, let's say it's a work context, maybe things are stressful, maybe you're having a relationship issue with a family member, maybe you're working with a team and you're trying to understand the current context of the team dynamics, and you may be making lots of progress, or maybe you're fighting through a lot of inertia and relationship issues. So the first question is, why am I here? We'll come back to that one in a second. Question number 2 is, what's going on around me? Question number 3 is, what am I going to do about it? And question 4 is, how will my actions affect others? So let me give you a really practical example. So let's take a look at the first question, or the first context question. Why am I here? Well, maybe you're here in this current situation because you want to have a proactive conversation with your wife. tell you that you love her, that you care for her. Maybe that's been prompted because you were really short with her, you were interrupting her, you were not kind. And there might have been some context for that. You might have had a long day, you were really tired. What she said shouldn't have been particularly irritating, but you responded in an irritating fashion. So you're there because you want to have a productive and encouraging conversation with your wife to tell her that you love her. So the second part of that question relates to, okay, so why am I here? The second question is, what's going on around me? Okay, so what's going around you is she's mad at me, and I screwed up once again. And the context was I was tired, came home late, and I didn't respond in a very affirming or very patient manner to really what was an innocent question. Okay, question number 3, what am I going to do about it? Well, I'm going to apologize, and I'm going to tell her that I love her. I'm going to give her a hug, and I'm going to respect and encourage her. Now, in that context, it might have to be more than that, right? Because maybe this has happened a few times. And so what you're going to do about it is not just say those words, but you're going to make an intentional effort to do things that are consistent with what you have just said to your wife, and will demonstrate love in a real tangible way to her. And for all of our relationships, that tangible representation of love will be different for all of our partners. No one person is exactly the same in terms of how they experience love in that relationship. And number 4, how will my actions affect others? Well, the action might be she may forgive me, and we might have a great night tonight, and we'll get back on track to having a positive relationship. And if there's kids involved, there's no doubt that our kids will experience the calming effect of that repaired and renewed relationship. So whenever you're in a particular circumstances, and particularly when there's stress and it's heated and there's some challenges, these 4 questions provide clear awareness, situational awareness. Why am I here? What's going on around me? What am I going to do about it? How will my actions affect others? So try that out. And the more and more you try it, the more it becomes just second nature, just becomes a habit for you. By asking these questions, you go from default modes, right? We go into particular circumstances and we have triggers. And because we're not as reflective as we need to be sometimes, we just respond out of frustration or anger or disengagement because we're not really understanding the situation around us and what the appropriate responses should be in that context. Now, the other thing is, to do this, it needs to be a conscious effort initially, but the more you do it, it becomes more and more unconscious and just a normal part of your thinking process, even in the context of stressful, emotional, particular experiences like that. And that's what's really critical about this. Is it's one thing to know it intellectually, but the more you practice it, it becomes just second nature. So that even when you're tired, even when you are emotional, you can have clear situational awareness. That will be very helpful for you. The next area I want to talk about is this notion of wisdom. It's kind of a highfalutin term, right? Wisdom. What does that really mean? Well, wisdom is you see clearly what you couldn't see before. And we've all had experiences where we read something, maybe we read it repeatedly, but we never really understood the meaning embedded in that information. Many of us go through life where someone else is putting information in our heads, but it's not insight, it's just information. And so wisdom or insight is something that you come up with on your own, and it informs or instructs you to be more effective in your life. So we commonly think of traditions and sacred texts or religious texts, and they can contain information that can be valuable. But reading this information won't in itself make you wise. Wisdom comes through reflection. It comes through struggle. And the only way that you can create that in your life is taking time to reflect, taking time to struggle through the information. So wisdom doesn't come from just reading some information and memorizing the information and planting it in your head. And you need to spend time unpacking that information and struggling with it and seeing how it applies to your life and being thoughtful about it. It just gets back to those common practices of, it can be meditation, it can be prayer, it can be journaling, but disengaging from your current environment and seeking self-knowledge through the information that you read. So it's through a little bit of struggle. So the way you see the world and your experiences in the world is shaped by the amount of reflection that you're willing to do. It's a really critical skill for a resilient professional. Leaders need to do this. Now, again, in the book Resilience by Eric Greitens, he goes on to talk about ways that we can practically use this notion of reflection and really struggling with information that we take in the world and how we can become wiser as a result of that information. So the illustration he uses comes from elite sport, and we learn for that. When we practice something, we get better and better at it. And often when we look at great athletes, we think it's predominantly, their training programs and their genetics and all the other things that go into becoming an elite athlete. But one of the most crucial things is simply just practice. And it's a secret weapon that all great performers know they have to make use of. It's something that helps them to take maximum advantage of their genetics. But also practicing helps you to anticipate. It heightens your awareness. So you can take a great athlete, but that great athlete becomes even more effective through diligent practice. And you talk about whether it's a musician or different kinds of sports, it's practice that makes the fundamental difference. When we talk about different sports, I'll give you an example. Take the world of baseball as an example, where you see batters who, through hours and hours and years of practice, they're able to anticipate, to see things that the average person can't see because of the practice that they put in. Their neurology, their physiology all becomes hyper-focused. Boxers are the same way. So when you're in a boxing match, a boxer that's been sparring for hours and hours and years can anticipate moves. So practice makes the world look different. We see things that most people ignore or just don't see. So if we go back to the batter relationship, you can take a major league hitter, and they can be amazing in the context of Major League Baseball, and they can face some of the best pitchers in the business and be relatively successful, at least in baseball terms. But you take that same baseball player, professional baseball player, and you put them in the context of, let's say, Olympic softball, where all of a sudden the pitching is a completely different technique. And those major league hitters who are so phenomenal in the Major League Baseball context can't even hit the ball in the context of someone pitching underhand using a completely different technique, because what's lost to them is the ability to anticipate. So it's critical in all kinds of areas that we need to embrace this idea of practice. So how do we take this notion of practice and apply it to this world of professional work and personal life? So the resilient professional understands that practice is absolutely critical as a way of enhancing their anticipatory abilities. And you look at the example of a salesperson. Great salespeople, part of their apprenticeship is meeting with hundreds, if not thousands of people over a career. And as they go through those experiences, if they're insightful, if they reflect on their experiences, they become better at it. Is it really a long shot to believe that just like a batter can anticipate where the ball's going to go from a great pitcher, that a great salesperson or consultant becomes better at anticipating where the process is going to go because they've had so many opportunities to walk people through their consultative process. And they've become unconscious. They have this ability to read people's body languages and communication styles that becomes more and more effective over the years. Now, the reality is we all have limited insights because gaining insight takes practice. It takes time, and it takes experiences and time to reflect on. So we have some areas that we're excellent at because we can put time into it, but we all need to recognize that we have areas of poor insight. There are only so many hours of the day that we can put into different activities. And this is when resilient professionals need to show a little bit of humility and admit that they have gaps in their situational awareness, in their awareness around what they can do well and where they can have insights, where they can anticipate. And it's in those moments of humility that they understand that they should seek the knowledge and the insights of others. And so that's why you can be really good at one aspect of your profession. But as you begin to venture into other areas, unless you're prepared to spend a lot of time practicing, having new experiences, then wrestling with those experiences and reflecting on them and refining them, then you might be better off hiring a coach, a consultant or a mentor or getting a book or a process that can help you to fast track those areas. Or maybe you just need to outsource it. Just have somebody else be involved in your team to help you to be effective. Well, it's my hope that you found these ideas helpful. So let's just summarize quickly. So the first thing we need to cultivate is wisdom. How do you get wisdom? It's not just about reading information. I mean, that's the start of it, right? But you need to take time to reflect on the information that you read and to wrestle with it and to see how it applies to your particular circumstances and to wrestle with how you can put it into your real world experience. So seeking wisdom and insight is critically important. And the only way you can do that is to get away, to spend some time journaling and meditating on these issues that you want to make improvements on, and then getting insights. The second thing we talked about was situational awareness. I give you 4 questions from the book Resilience by Eric Greitens on how you become much more aware and aren't rationalizing away issues, become much more sort of mindful of the current context that you're in so you can be more effective. And you don't allow instinct and emotion and just habitual patterns to drive your actions with your teams and your families and the people around you. The other thing we talked about was just how important practice is. And we're talking about intentional practice. So practicing, reflecting on your practice, trying to get better, it takes time and it takes effort. And the practical reality is we only have so much time in the day, right? So you spend time on those critical tasks that are key to your success professionally, maybe even personally. And then you also admit with humility that maybe you have to hire a consultant or a coach or other experts or work with your team to fill in the gaps, because you can only become insightful, wise, to have anticipatory skills in so many areas, right? So we only have so much time, so be very strategic about which areas you're going to work on. Well, I hope you found the podcast helpful. If you want to unpack these ideas in more detail, make sure you download the Resilient Professional ebook from the website. And again, all the best with your progress around personal and professional resiliency.